This is KPFK. 90.7 FM, Los Angeles.
Freedom, we shall not be.
There's a lot to be thankful for. If you're thankful for the old family vehicle, you can let it help one more time by donating it to the KPFK Vehicle Donation Program. The proceeds will help KPFK continue the quality programming you depend on throughout the year. The vehicle donation number is 877-KPFK-AUTO. That's 877-573-5288. Our representative will take care of everything. That number again is 877-KPFK-AUTO or donate online at kpfk.org.
Rock that boogie, get your rocking shoes, we're gonna rock and roll. Come on, cats, let's go, go, go.
Hi, I'm Bill Gardner, host of Rhapsody in Black. I play classic rhythm and blues from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Boogie with Bill Gardner every Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4 on KPFK 90.7 FM.
Rock that boogie.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Spotlight Africa. I am Assumpta Uturu. Spotlight Africa brings you news analysis and current affairs of the African continent, including global issues affecting Africa, the African diaspora, and the global south. On the program today, we revisit some aspects of the emerging multipolar world following the recent St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
Середина 15 века.
Middle of the 15th century, Europe is exploring the world in different parts of the world ocean. There are full sailing expeditions of the ships. The age of discovery disguises the unpleasant reality that it's an era of colonization and pillaging of the world. Colonizers subjugate the nations and bring destruction. Rebirth of the civilization is the way it looks like. The ships return to their motherland full of wealth. European cities are becoming wealthier and increasing. Subjugated nations lose their identity and become poor. In the next 500 years, the European civilization robbed India, America, China, and other cultures. There were reservations created for native nations. Hundreds of thousands of people were sold into slavery. In the current conditions, the colonial march of the West did not stop. The pillaging became even more hypocritical with dollar dependence. Hundreds of years of living at the expense of others gave the Western world a mentality of colonizer. They say that they invented the rules and you have to follow them. They have demanded that always, but now the new time has come. The time of justice, honesty, and equality. Russia is a civilization state, the only in the history of humankind managed to stand up to the Western colonization. In more than 1,000 years of its history, Russia defended itself against the attempts to invade it, defending its traditions. It is Russia, the beginning of the 21st century, led the fight of the nations for the New World Order. Russia refused to follow rules invented by someone else and to play into the hands of colonizer. Russia inspired nations with the ideas of multipolar world. During the shaping of the new world, there is a change in economy. There are new centers of power and development. Economic colonialism is substituted with economic order based on the principles of justice. The new points of growth that have unique technologies and the solutions are prepared to compete successfully and find a new niche in the global arena.
When addressing the forum, the Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin told delegates from 59 countries about the Chinese model of development that has brought a large number of Chinese population out of poverty. Today, the Russian Federation has been willing to share technology with African countries, more particularly in the area of nuclear energy.
How they've been making that argument for so long to justify why most nations of the world, mostly black nations, should not be allowed to access advanced nuclear energy because they're so corrupt, they're so unstable that these dual-use technologies could be used easily for weapons, so we should just prevent it outright. But then you ask the question, why is this corruption such a problem? Why are they so unstable? And you realize that the same people making the argument are the same agencies who are destabilizing artificially those countries and keeping them poor artificially and keeping them destabilized by supporting insurrectionary groups, ethno-nationalists, separatist groups, providing weapons to terrorists, and just providing also a control over the economies through private, international corporations, usually centered in the London Stock Exchange, in the British Cayman Islands, in Canada, in Australia, other British Commonwealth territories, which are extracting and looting these nations within the continent of Africa to keep them down, to keep them poor, and to not provide anything for the people. So again, it's a Pygmalion effect. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's dishonest.
I am Assumpta Uturu. Stay tuned to Spotlight Africa here on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles and streaming live on kpfk.org.
Zimbabwe, in spite of 24 years of sanctions by the West for the crime of claiming our land, which every country has done, sanctions have been imposed on us for the last 24 years. However, because of resilience, peace prevailing in the country, Zimbabwe's economic GDP has grown during the Second Republic in 2018 from 26 billion to now 69 billion in 2023, in spite of sanctions imposed on us.
That was an extract of a speech given by the Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa. President Mnangagwa spoke recently at the plenary during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. He welcomed Russian investments to Zimbabwe and also spoke of the significance of supporting Africa in the development of the continent's productive capacities. The June St. Petersburg International Economic Forum also coincided with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to 4 African nations, which included the Republic of Congo, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Chad, the last refuge for French troops in the Sahel.
Russian instructors are working here, and their number will increase. At the same time, we provide training to the representatives of Burkina Faso armed forces and law enforcement officers in Russia.
That was the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov speaking during his visit to Burkina Faso, the third country of the 4-nation tour that concluded in Chad. After the French troops were expelled from Mali and Niger, Chad has become the refuge for French troops in the Sahel. The American troops are also leaving Niger, and the last of these troops are expected to be out of the West African country in September. But Americans leave behind a massive drone-based center that cost American taxpayers $280 million. Both Americans and the French missions in the Sahel failed in fighting the jihadis who were unleashed into the region following the assassination of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi by the Obama administration. Now for more analysis of the geopolitics in the West African region, the emerging multipolar world, we turn to Matthew Ehret. Matthew Ehret is a geopolitical analyst and editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriotic Review. He authored the Untold History of Canada book series and the Clashes of the Two Americas. Matthew Ehret is also the director and the co-founder of Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation. The Rising Tide Foundation focuses on promoting cross-cultural understanding and dialogue between the East and the West.
That was a very strong message. There was a point made as well by Lavrov that exports have increased by 25% as well over 2023 to Africa. And in turn, Russia has been purchasing many food products that are not, produced in Russia. So there's a reciprocation. It's not just defense, but defense is very important. I think that, there's military and technical agreements to train, to provide aid, arms transfers. They'd organized already and planned out a variety of summits across a lot of these African nations, specifically, as you pointed out, Guinea, the Republic of Congo, Burkina Faso, Chad, but also economic agreements on energy. I think that I was just reading an article this morning about an agreement signed with Guinea to build floating nuclear reactors that Russia has agreed to support. This is very, very positive. And the fact that it's happening at the same time, or that it happened at the same time as the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was very strong. There was, I don't know when the third Russian-African summit is going to be held. I hope it's going to be this year, but it might be next year. There was already two very important ones, the last being in 2023. And again, many agreements were signed. Rosatom made their intention to work with every single African country who wishes to develop nuclear power known. They had meetings with the heads or representatives, energy ministers from nearly every African nation. It was very positive. But then, like you said, I mean, these countries have really been suffering as well terrorism. So Africa has been a beacon of light in providing real functional resources to deal with the growth of terrorism. And I was, again, shocked to read some of these statistics, Like, there's been a 2,000% increase in terrorist-related deaths over 15 years between 2007 and 2023 across a lot of these African nations of the Sahel. This is all happening at periods when the G5 was created, overseen by the Anglo-French apparatus, which was designed to stop terrorism. But instead, what we're just seeing is all of these Western-directed ISIS proxies, Boko Haram and others, who we've proven already have been receiving weapons support, logistic support, both in the Middle East as well as in Mali and beyond, by Western CIA-connected agencies to destabilize governments that are not behaving according to the wishes of those controlling NATO. So that Russia is actually going in and providing a very, very potent support and training and to deal with this problem. It's very hopeful. And again, it's giving, I think, a lot of courage to these countries that have begun shedding the shackles of the French imperial program and American. Niger is announced that 5,000 U.S. troops are going to be gone by September. A lot of these countries are finally kicking out the French, kicking out the American troops that have been stationed there. So I think that if Russia had not been providing that support, they wouldn't have the courage, they wouldn't have the technical means to do what they do. And of course, China has been playing a very important role by providing a means to build infrastructure in a competent way. And other nations of the BRICS, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, have been providing a good support to many of these ambitions as well. So it's all quite good. And the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was very hopeful. I mean, I didn't read all of the transcripts but from what I have read, there were so many deals signed, both with African nations for food. There's a massive amount of agricultural exports that Russia has assisted in many cases to countries in great need and freely, which the West has not even come close to approximating. So a lot of the threats that Russia was going to starve Africa by having the war with Ukraine, it's not manifesting in any way. There's more Russian agricultural exports coming into Africa than there was even before the war began. So yeah, there's a lot of points to be hopeful.
So wouldn't the West use the argument, meaning the United States, Britain, and all the rest of the Western allies, sort of accuse Russia for supplying nuclear technology to Africa, referring to these weak nations, and this is going to be a danger to the world? Would that be a strong argument for the West to say that this has to be stopped?
Yeah, it's dirty, eh? How they've been making that argument for so long to justify why most nations of the world, mostly Black nations, should not be allowed to access advanced nuclear energy because they're so corrupt, they're so unstable that these dual-use technologies could be used easily for weapons. So we should just prevent it outright. But then you ask the question, why is this corruption such a problem? Why are they so unstable? And you realize that the same people making the argument are the same agencies who are destabilizing artificially those countries and keeping them poor artificially and keeping them destabilized by supporting insurrectionary groups, ethno-nationalists, separatist groups, providing weapons to terrorists, and just providing also a control over the economies through private, international corporations, usually centered in the London Stock Exchange, in the British Cayman Islands, in Canada, in Australia, other British Commonwealth territories, which are extracting and looting these nations within the continent of Africa to keep them down, to keep them poor, and to not provide anything for the people. So again, it's a Pygmalion effect. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's dishonest.
Yeah, then going back to the International Economic Forum, it's interesting that it's been happening for the last 26 years, and I missed it. 27 years later, I discovered it. So what has been the impact, and what is the likely impact? Because when Putin spoke, he focused more on the issue of trade, the issue of cooperation, the issue of checking out a model of development. And it seems the Chinese example became the kind of focus that should be attractive to other countries.
Putin has been very clear in many interviews and many speeches how envious he is of China's power and capability over their financial system to carry out big projects and to have that sovereignty and control over the banking architecture, which is lacking in most nations, which unfortunately over the decades have agreed to setting up privatized central banking systems operating not as tools of the elected governments of countries, but as an independent agency beholden to unelected technocrats in Basel, in the City of London, at the Bank of International Settlements, in the Bank of England, at the World, who manage certain agencies like the World Trade Organization, which is supposed to be sort of the whips, keeping everybody obedient to the rules of globalization and free trade. So that's been the unfortunate scam, which has prevented many nations from being able to wield the tools needed to become truly economically free. And I would also include, frankly, even many developed countries of the transatlantic, the United States included, that have not had the ability to win back the independence lost by these private central bankers that often control a huge influence in Wall Street, in the City of London as well, because of the Federal Reserve having been created and other similar bodies in the European banking system that, again, are not beholden to the national institutions. They're beholden to an unelected grouping of technocrats who are trained in the halls of Oxford, of Cambridge, and have no moral alliance to the nations that they were born in, There's a purely dogmatic ideological drive to those who are promoted within that infrastructure. Russia has suffered the influence of many of these technocrats for many decades, which especially in the 1990s, when the privatization of everything in Russia was initiated by Jeffrey Sachs and others around the Bill Clinton administration, who ensured the takeover of many of these zombie technocrats who became the leaders of the bureaucracy of Russia, especially the Russian central bank, which was not permitted to emit productive credit, the way it should be allowed if it was a true sovereign country, but abiding by the rules of globalization, the arbitrary 3% rule, that one should never permit debt beyond 3% of GDP, which usually doesn't even work out that well. But all that to say, these were like arbitrary mathematical rules brought in by the World Trade Organization, which prevented the emission of productive credit for the real large-scale infrastructure that the Russians needed, that other nations needed. But China was able to keep control over its national banks. And it has now 4 major national banks, but many other smaller ones that are under the control, not of a private clique, but rather the institutions of the nation, which is why China, and again, Putin has spoken so much about his fondness and envy of this capacity, China's been able to build 39,000 kilometers of high-speed rail within their own country and provide large-scale infrastructure investments to other nations as well. So the fact that Putin has made it clear that this is the model that he is aiming towards, he's made it clear to those technocrats that they have to learn how to think about economics from China. So forget the crap that they were taught in Harvard. Many of them are Western trained or Yale. And go back to the drawing board and think about the fundamentals once again. This is very important. And again, this St. Petersburg International Economic Summit had 59 nations who expressed at various times their interest and intention to join the BRICS, which is already at 10 members. We have Turkey, one of those members, who expressed their intention. The foreign minister said how much Turkey wants to join the BRICS, which would be an incredible game changer, considering Turkey is also a part of NATO. That's a big deal.
More with Matthew Eret later as we take a music and station break. I am Assumpta Uturu. You are listening to Spotlight Africa here on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles and streaming live on kpfk.org. Coming up next, Matthew Eret, who is a geopolitical analyst, speaks to the new financial architecture of the BRICS Plus countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa were the original BRICS countries, but Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia were admitted during BRICS' last summit in South Africa. Argentina declined the membership.
What to do in God's name. So we'll fight for the right to be free. We'll build our own society. We'll sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. When the ancient drum rhythms ring, the voice of our forefathers sing. Forward Africa, run, our day of freedom has come. For me and for you, Amanda, I wear too.
Hi, I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! In-depth news coverage is becoming a rare commodity in today's media landscape. There's a straightforward reason. It's no longer profitable for commercial media. Serious journalism is expensive. It takes time to prepare. It requires a large and talented team of researchers, reporters, editors, and producers. That's why listener-supported news and information on KPFK is more important than ever. We continue to bring you comprehensive coverage from skilled, dedicated dedicated journalists, because you continue to support the work we do here all year round. Please continue to support KPFK, all the vital work that's done at this Pacifica station. Call 818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK, and join the KPFK Sustainer Circle, or you can give at kpfk.org.
If you don't already know about it, it's really time to discover KPFK. KPFK is community radio from Southern California, powered by people like yourself for over 6 decades now. It's part of the completely unique Pacifica network, and our listeners and sponsors are passionate. We've routinely heard them say things like,
"It is the best source of news that I know of."
The main thing that distinguishes Pacifica from the rest of the media landscape is our funding model, listener sponsorship. It allows us to speak to what really matters in our listeners' lives. Consider becoming a part of this impassioned community by making a pledge today. With your generous continuing support, KPFK is committed to serving the vast and diverse communities of Southern California and beyond. So please, make that pledge now at kpfk.org/donate or call 818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK. Thank you.
Putin and his allies, Siluanov, the finance minister, Anton Siluanov, gave speeches describing the transition to a new currency, a new type of financial transaction mechanism that would respect local currencies as part of something that wouldn't be influenced by the Anglo-American bankers. So that would be good to be able to have that liberty. We know that already Russia has about 85% of all of the financial transactions processed by the Bank of Russia are in local currencies outside of the US dollar. And that's big considering that in 2022, it was only 26%. And there's new payment mechanisms as well. There's a Russian payment system, an African version of the SWIFT as well, which is being integrated also with the Chinese alternative to the SWIFT. So different ways to settle balance of payments outside of the use of the US dollar and in local currencies is a really important way to protect nations from speculative attacks, which is easily done both by the nature of the volatility of the speculative markets, but also the fact that the US dollar can be used thus to sanction many nations who are misbehaving. So by being able to settle transactions with local currencies, which it looks like will transition more quickly to some form of a BRICS, I believe. And according to the remarks by the foreign minister of Iran, not the finance minister of Iran, just in May of 2024, he even made the point that there is already hard at work amongst the leaders of the BRICS, a transition towards a new BRICS digital currency. Iran and Russia are working heavily on that. So there's already these discussions underway, and I think it would offer a lot of space for nations to be able to recapture their rightful economic sovereignty. It's not something which is easy to talk directly about with any specifics at the moment, because it's somewhat fluid and it is very complex. It's not easy. It was a somewhat easy formula after World War II, when the Americans came out with the most intact and viable economy and the most productive economy of the world, such that the argument could very easily be made in 1945, 46. That the US dollar is better than gold, not because gold per se had necessarily any of the mystical value people assume. I mean, gold is better than debt, of course, but it's really what gave it the reason why that statement was true was because the productive powers industrially, agriculturally, I would even say culturally, of the United States was so powerful and so good and measurable that the dollars in circulation were recognized as having intrinsic value because it was backed by real productivity. And that connection to the real world economy, the water production systems, the energy grids that were being built up, maintained, improved upon, new technologies that were being developed in an aggressive way. And I say that in a good way, through our research and development initiatives that were then translated into new upgraded technologies that allowed for the opening up of new resources, new ways of doing things. All of that ensured that when there was an increase of the monetary system, for the most part, like the dollars in circulation, it wasn't going to be inflationary, but rather that it was going to be anti-inflationary. So you could have more money in circulation if those productive, measurable, physical processes were also increasing at a qualitative and quantitative speed, which is generally, with some exceptions, the trend between 1945 and early 1970s. That unfortunately came undone. That connection to reality and the US dollar values were broken. And so it became abused, increasingly because everyone still had US dollars as reserves that they were settling their payments. The US itself, which became increasingly induced to behave more and more like an empire instead of as a sovereign nation, and an empire that saw, unfortunately, its advantage, its self-interest in keeping other nations down and keeping other nations poor in order to have sweatshops, cheap labor, cheap resources that could be stolen from those countries, extracted from nations of Asia, Africa, even Latin America. That became the new paradigm of a more imperial USA. Not to say the USA was ever fully free of being an empire. It always had that problem, but it was moving more under John F. Kennedy's time towards becoming a real sovereign nation state that wanted to help other nations develop and prosper. And that was short-lived. So as that happened, the U.S. dollar lost its claims to having intrinsic value. The U.S. lost its productivity. Its manufacturing and factories were outsourced, so it became increasingly a consumer society. And with that, the speculative activities of Wall Street became dominant. And so the idea growth became redefined to making money with money based on debts that didn't even exist, securitized debts. So all of these things grew out of proportion, and the U.S. economy became more and more of a bubble devoid of reality. And now it's more of a liability. And the fact that everybody had U.S. dollars under this new paradigm of empire became abused, and now they could be sanctioned because they wouldn't be allowed to do transactions with companies that, let's say, were in Iran or in Sudan that were deemed bad behaving nations. And so these countries were then suffocated. Sudan could have been the breadbasket for Africa, not that a few decades ago. And it's been induced by these sanctions to be, and they've been punished and punished and punished, as have many other countries, to be destabilized and underdeveloped. So, but now we have a recognition that the U.S. dollar is not very viable anymore. The U.S. economy is a basket case. I think that it's more and more understood that there is a financial collapse impending, centered in the Western transatlantic banking order. And this has forced now discussions about this new alternative BRICS-oriented currency. And I don't know, I listen to the writings of many Russian economists, many Chinese economists, Iranian economists, giving their thoughts over what form this new currency is going to take. I think that there is a consensus that it will involve some form of blockchain mechanism. It might involve certain types of digital tokens tied to the blockchain, but I think more importantly, there will be a basket. Like you have certain mechanisms, like the contingency reserve agreement that was created amongst the BRICS nations, and many other nations are able to participate, which acts kind of like the IMF, and this was created in 2014. It acts the way the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, was designed to work. However, the IMF quickly became a tool and instrument for empire with the Cold War, so it was never permitted to the type of mechanism that would provide the long-term, low interest investments into nations' development aspirations. It was just never permitted to be that thing. So the contingency reserve agreement is similar. It allows for a market basket of various currencies, local currencies. It might have some sort of common denominator of exchange. I think this would be the blockchain token, but these currencies would then themselves have to be valued under some scientific form of. I liked Sergei Glaziev's approach the most, who's an advisor to Vladimir Putin. He's an economist, a wonderful economist, and he's the Minister of Macroeconomic Integration of the Eurasian Economic Union. And Glaziev has outlined in thorough detail over the years the formula for valuing currencies around not speculation or securitized debts, but rather based upon market baskets featuring an array of produced goods, agricultural goods, a certain rate of production of steel, industrial steel, certain types of essential minerals that are, again, measurable and existent in the real world, right? So you would take an array of these. There wouldn't be an easy mathematical formula, and I don't think anybody should want to find some form of this is not Keynesian in that sense. It's not something that anyone should look for a mathematical formula so that they could ever stop thinking and problem solving at any moment and have a formula or a computer program think for them. That's the way a lot of the Western technocrats wish they aspire to create something like that with their Western private central bank digital currencies. That's a different idea. That's detached from real productivity. So the idea that I see converging in the BRICS is things that are tied to the measurable productive powers of labor that would then justify the credit emissions, the type of productive credit that could be emitted that would be tied to assets that every country puts into the contingency reserve that could then be amplified by several fold, because you only need to have a certain amount of reserves in a bank to justify a much greater rate of loans if the loans are done wisely. It can't be predatory loans, but if it's loans to productive things that will be self-extinguishing loans because they're productive, they will extinguish themselves when those enterprises being invested in begin to manifest in real growth. Then you can have upwards of a tenfold multiplicity of outward loans. So if you have $100 billion or $1 trillion, let's say, of rupees and ruples and real and rand and other things inside of the contingency reserve, you can have a tenfold increase more investments into high-speed rail and other things, water systems beyond that. Now, you don't just have the contingency reserve, though. You also have the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. You have the new development bank, also created in 2014, which is sort of otherwise known as the BRICS Bank. You have the New Silk Road Investment Fund. You have an array of construction banks and agriculture banks in China that have produced, in proof of principle, a very serious and good guideline of how a bank is meant to work and produce real things effectively and big things. So these are all different ways of thinking about, I think, how what I'm seeing with these leading economists around. Lavrov he's got very good advisors, but again, Glaziev is key. Their minds are all sort of moving in that direction, as are a lot of the leading Chinese economists who have been mastering the art of productivity, like real big scale productivity, and doing it better and better each year. I mean, China has done miracles, and only between 2000 and 2024, they've erased poverty in China. They went from a population that had a middle income category of only 3% being middle income earners in the year 2000 to becoming today it's 53% of the Chinese population is middle income and growing. There's a greater array of private. It's not all big, communist bureaucracy either. There's a bustling, very rich private sector in China. Small and medium enterprises are huge in China, and they're assisted by the government. So it's not communist in the old fashioned sense of the word. It's different.
I think the problem when people, especially in the West, think of communism, they always associate it with autocracy and dictatorship, the way it was implemented in Russia and all the other countries. And when you have those discussions, they have never even read the manifesto. So
never.
So it's just the hearsay. And I really appreciate your explanation, because it sounds like, Matt Eret, that the U.S. seems to have sabotaged its own economy after rising up on high after World War II. It could have continued in that trajectory, being the dominant power, but also economically, because the dollar was the currency. But then it sabotaged itself. But what is interesting now, looking at the new dynamics that are kind of overtaking the structure of the Western economic, monetary setup, is the way the BRICS are actually doing it. And I found it when you mentioned that they raised that integration with the Chinese system and the Pan-African, So how then, like the president of Zimbabwe talked about 27 years of sanctions that it has gone through, how then do countries like Cuba, who have been under economic sanctions, I don't know, is more than 60 years now, how would they leap out of those sanctions being imposed by the West when, come October, if it's announced that this is now possible, how will it help those countries that have been sanctioned? We are even forgetting that Russia itself is sanctioned. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a great question too. I mean, Russia has, I think, proven, as has Iran for that matter, how being sanctioned is not a death sentence the way some within the West had wished it to be. It's strange how they're not learning their lesson. They began by sanctioning Iran. They confiscated Iranian foreign deposits, right? Well before they did it to Russia back in the 80s. They've been sanctioning Iran for years and years and years on almost everything you can imagine, but Iran has still been able to grow and build indigenous manufacturing, high technology hubs, even seeing their scientists assassinated in the hundreds over the years. Despite all of that sabotage, and they've still been able to grow a very, very strong economy and develop relationships with other nations around them, including not just obviously Russia and China, which they've signed 20-year agreements on, major agreements on energy, defense, and economics, but also now Saudi Arabia. They've reopened diplomatic bridges with Saudi Arabia. Both of them now are members of the BRICS. They've reopened diplomatic bridges with Turkey, with UAE, many nations of the Sunni world who were induced for decades to be enemies of the Shia Muslim world, especially Iran, under the Kissinger's Zbigniew Brzezinski guidelines. That whole Sunni versus Shia model that was imposed by David Rockefeller, Brzezinski, the other Trilateral Commission grand strategists of the 70s, that did so much damage. But it's finally coming to an end, and we're seeing now a lot of diplomatic positive relations and economic relations opening up all over the place in the Middle East, largely because of the support of Russia and China. But again, Iran was doing so much despite being sanctioned. Now, Russia has also demonstrated that they're the fourth largest economy. They just surpassed Japan in the world, despite all of these sanctions. A lot of their growth has occurred since the sanctions. And this is happening while the West is self-sabotaging, self-mutilating.
Matthew Eret's analysis of the new financial architecture of the BRIC Plus countries continues momentarily. now take a music and station break. I am Assumpta Uturu. You are listening to Spotlight Africa here on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles and streaming live online on kpfk.org.
Majirani vidole na macho yangu, msininyime amani kulitovuga penzi langu, namlinda kama mboni na mpenda tabani, kwenye husuda ya fisi mshiriki kunifitini na mama sasa.
There's a lot to be thankful for. If you're thankful for the old family vehicle, you can let it help one more time by donating it to the KPFK Vehicle Donation Program. The proceeds will help KPFK continue the quality programming you depend on throughout the year. The vehicle donation number is 877-KPFK-AUTO. That's 877-573-5288. Our representative will take care of everything. That number again is 877-KPFK-AUTO or donate online at kpfk.org.
Your donations help keep KPFK alive. Your tax-deductible support helps fund new equipment, repairs, community events, station operations, and yes, the broadcast with me, Brad Friedman, heard Mondays at 3 p.m. on the air in Los Angeles and at Pacifica radio stations across the country. That is thanks to your help. Our programming is free of corporate influence, whether it's big oil, big pharma, big banks, or big anybody other than you, our listeners. We're here for you in good times and bad, but need you to be here for us. Please keep progressive, independent media alive by stopping by kpfk.org to make a contribution today. You'll also help us shorten our fund drives as well. That's kpfk.org to donate today. And thank you for your support.
Under degrowth, deindustrial policies that are shutting down our means of productivity in Europe, even Japan, across the United States, our agro-industrial sector is being destroyed, nominally to, meet climate targets and things like that. But it's insane what type of logic is governing the West. Whereas, again, Russia has built up better, solid alliances with India, with its Asian alliances, with China, obviously, but also with Saudi Arabia and others. And it's creating, I think, it's breaking the illusion, because a big part of the game of globalization over the last decades has worked through the Wizard of Oz principle of everyone has to believe in the illusion for it to work. No one can call out the emperor as having no clothes. No one can call out the ugly little dude behind the curtain acting like he's the Oz, the great wizard. But if you do it, the illusion's broken. And I think the illusion is breaking faster and faster every day, including amongst nations that have been trapped under the euro, under the US dollar dominance. And they're seeing now a legitimate fight. So when, Russia is signing deals with Cuba, some on defense, others on other economic agreements, they've got there's discussions around building more ports. China, same thing, in Venezuela too, and other South American countries. China's building massive infrastructure. They've signed so many deals with Latin American and Caribbean countries. It's dizzying, and it's scaring a lot of the Pentagon. The Pentagon CIA operatives who have been trying to keep control of Latin America, the Caribbean nations for so many decades. They're scared because they see their power slipping away as economic real development is benefiting the people, benefiting the corrupt agencies that have been promoted within a lot of the Latin American nations. A lot of these agencies of corruption that were supported by the CIA since the 70s and even before that to maintain local controls. Even them, some of the better aspects of these groupings have been won over to the idea that maybe they can actually make money that's not involving killing their own people, which is, I guess, for some of these people who played a dirty game, they still have a bit of a conscience and they want to sleep at night and have a life for their kids. So they've even participated in signing on to building all sorts of things. And again, China has like 40 ports. Russia is signing deals, not as much as China, but still it's significant. So I think that people will increasingly, as the crisis worsens and it becomes more impossible to ignore the imminent collapse of the US dollar system, there will be more confidence to sign real agreements with nations who you're not supposed to talk to. India, again, did a great job of demonstrating how this works. India was put under a lot of pressure to not play with Russia, to not do business with Russia. But Russia made deals that India couldn't refuse. And India knows that they're ultimately going to be thrown under the bus by their Western allies who don't really care about them, who did so much damage and destruction to India over 250, 260 years of ongoing genocide, controlled famines under the British Empire, who never permitted India to gain economic independence. And I think India is waking up to these historic lessons. They know who to trust. They're supplementing all of the oil that Russia is no longer selling to Europe, is being supplemented by India, which has been purchasing. I think it increased like something like 4,000-fold increase or something ridiculously large in purchases of Russian natural gas and oil. Same thing for Saudi Arabia, who also sees that they're disposable. They would be thrown under the bus if they remained under the influence of their so-called allies amongst the Western Empire. So yeah, I think that these are it's contagious. It's just seeing how nations are working with the forbidden countries and gaining great advantage to their people, to their national interests is something which is being looked up to by many countries, Africa being no exception.
So in other words, the collapse of the dollar, Matt Eret, will happen when countries now shift. And if Africans begin to effectively utilize this Pan-African payment system and they leap on to using what BRICS have established, and then Latin America also does the same, then it sounds like we'll see the dollar not being used anymore. It will then be within the Atlantic ally, because China and Russia are attracting all the global South to itself and say, you've been denied it, now you can use your own currency. And here is the offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I that's exactly how I'm thinking.
Now but what is the West thinking when it's watching all this happening and seeing its own demise, the reality of its own demise?
I don't know. It's hard to get into the mind of crazy like that, eh? I think partly it's being drunk on your own propaganda. The West has extended, has projected a set of images that everyone is expected to believe in. Again, I go back to the Emperor Has No Clothes, Hans Christian Andersen's story, or the Wizard of Oz, and that's how their power has largely found its influence, is through people believing in their propaganda. And I think that the problem with the current collapsing empire is that it's staffed largely by second, third generation technocrats who are much less intelligent than the earlier generation of Zbigniew Brzezinski or Henry Kissinger, who are dead. They're old and dead. They were smarter. They didn't believe their own propaganda, whereas the new generation does. They're getting dumber. And that is resulting in an inability to recognize the internal contradictions of the system, which demand global hegemony, dominance by a unipolar elite that can project their desires by power of will onto the weak of the world. But they are also committed to activities that are making themselves weak at the same time. They've undermined their own economy systemically over 60 years of deindustrialization.
Yeah, it sounds like Britain watching the sunset on this empire and still believing it was great and still believing it's great. But now the membership and the continued expansion, you talked about Turkey coming in. and of course is part of NATO and of recent, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this too. Joe Biden announced that Kenya is a non-NATO ally, and there are speculations that Kenya might be admitted into the BRICS, but we know Kenya is a neo-colonial state, you know. So how are the BRICS watching out for such countries that when you know that you are allowing them in, but it's really a door for your enemy to enter into your house?
Well, I don't have an easy answer for that. You're right. Like Kenya is a mixed bag. They're part of the British Commonwealth. There's a lot of external influence manipulating the Kenyan economy, but at the same time, there's still something sovereign, where there is something within the leadership of Kenya that has the stamina to defy demands that they not work with China. Kenya has a variety of agreements with China that has helped to build rail and other infrastructure. So there's still something sovereign mixed in there. And I don't fully understand it, but definitely in the case of Turkey as well, you got foreign external influences, both through the defense sector within NATO, but also economically, as well as something viable that wishes to work in harmony with China and with other Eurasian nations on large scale development. Turkey, of course, is a fundamental entry point into the Mediterranean from the new Silk Road, as well as into Europe. It's called the Middle Corridor from the Belt and Road Initiative. And Turkey has had a lot of soul searching in the last 8 years, especially since the Western-directed coup d'etat failed to overthrow Erdogan in 2016. And that was largely because of Russia supporting Erdogan and giving him advance notice that this coup d'etat was about to take place. And since then, Turkey has we've seen a change in their behavior towards the positive. And Erdogan's been able to stay in power despite a lot of foreign influences within the government that wish to overthrow him and bring Turkey back into the NATO fold as a more well-behaving member. So how is it that we can guarantee correct behavior that would be honest as an ally of the multipolar alliance? I have no idea. It's I think a little bit of a dance. Everyone's trying to influence everything. And it's a game of, it's beyond chess, and it is a game of influence. China is trying to influence agency that they're part of the World Trade Organization. It doesn't mean that they're abiding by what the World Trade Organization demands, but they're trying to use influence that they can wield to win over converts and allies within these institutions, and have these institutions ideally serve the actual needs for both China and I think the broader human species. And the same thing for the World Economic Forum and other things. These are institutions which are often dishonest in their origins, but they have to, provide an outward good image and nominally promote good things in order to be trusted. And what I've noticed throughout history is wise, street smart leaders will be able to take the surface words of the good promoted by such agencies and actually provide deals that cannot be refused, that actually manifest the good. John F. Kennedy did a variety of these things in the measure that he could, as well within agencies that existed within the UN and other things in his time, though he was cut short.
And with that, we come to the end of Matthew Ehret's analysis of the impact of the new financial architecture of the BRICS Plus countries on the United States dollar, which is currently the global currency. Matthew Ehret is a geopolitical analyst and editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriotic Review. He authored the Untold History of Canada book series and the Clashes of the Two Americas. Matthew Ehret is also the director and co-founder of the Montreal-based The Rising Tide Foundation. The Rising Tide Foundation focuses on promoting cross-cultural understanding and dialogue between the East and the West. I am Assumpta Uturu. We've now come to the